you. I recently heard about a type of commercial financing that I don't know too much about, CPACE, and I decided I wanted to learn a little bit more today. So I'm talking with Tom O'Connor, who is the chair of Real Estate Finance Group and a member of the Real Estate Practice Group at Duval and Stachenfeld, a law firm based in New York City. Mr. O'Connor practices in the area of commercial real estate transactions with particular emphasis on real estate finance and has been active in PACE financing throughout the country. So he's got a expertise in this kind of emerging area of real estate finance. So welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, let's get right into it. Am I even saying it right? Is it CPACE and PACE financing?
Yes, it's CPACE refers to there are two types of PACE. There is residential PACE, which is what the homeowner would use, and it's not what I work with, frankly. And there's CPACE, which refers to commercial PACE. That's PACE that you would use for commercial buildings of all size. And PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy.
And how is it used?
It is used for, and I'm for the purpose of this conversation, I'm only speaking about commercial PACE. Also residential similar. Okay, it is if a owner of a building wants to improve the energy efficiency of his building or reduce carbon, which is a big trend now for all sorts of reasons, and they want to put in improvements to do that. Solar panels, high efficiency glass that lets the sun in the winter but blocks it out in the summer, so to improve air conditioning and heating. To pay for those improvements, they can finance those improvements through PACE. PACE is not a government program. People think it is. It's not. It's privately funded with government collaboration, government assistance. Government enables PACE to take place. They can get 100% financing for those improvements to pay for them, and they pay them back over a long-term assessment against the property. And the term is long. It will go, and I don't want to get too deep, but stop me if you will. The term of the payment, it will be this average useful life of those improvements you put in. So if you put in solar panels and they're going to last 25 years, you're paying it back over a 25-year period.
Interesting. So it's not a government program. It is.
No.
It's funded through individual lenders. How does that work?
PACE funding is, if I don't know if you're familiar with the ESG type investing, environmental,
Yes.
Social governance. PACE is right down the middle of the fairway when you talk about ESG. And the government, you can only have PACE where the government has stepped in and passed legislation to enable it. So it's something that governments are trying to encourage: energy efficiency, reduction of carbon. So they pass legislation that provides for private lenders, private funds, private equity funds, to lend money to these owners, but the local taxing authority places the assessment on the property, collects the repayment back like a tax, and then pays the private lender. So the local taxing authority is there to enable the assessment that's put against the property and the collection of the taxes. And if you don't pay your PACE assessment, it's the same consequence if you don't pay your taxes. It acts like a special tax or assessment on your property. Because the PACE repayment is treated like a tax, it comes in front of other debt on the property, like mortgage debt. And that causes a lot of discussion amongst mortgage lenders, as you can imagine.
So does that mean that mortgage lenders don't necessarily have a fondness for PACE?
You could say that, yes. As a matter of fact, mortgage lenders don't like people to get paid in front of them. And the only ones that do that today are taxing authorities. So PACE, commercial PACE started probably about 15 years ago, give or take on that year. And it's been a slow rollout because there's been a lot of resistance to it from the commercial lending market. As a matter of fact, if you picked up a lot of loan documents in the last 15 years, you'll find a specific provision written especially for PACE that says, "Thou shalt not have any PACE on this property." That is changing. That is changing dramatically.
So you mentioned that in order for PACE to work, it has to be available on the local level. So I know with New York, there's all of this green movement and the need to retrofit a whole bunch of buildings. So I'm assuming there's a lot of energy around PACE in New York City. Is that right?
There's an incredible amount going on right now, and then people really should be taking a look and paying attention to what's going on in this area. So let me back up for a second, because you're right. PACE is first passed at the state level, okay? And right now, 38 states in the United States have have PACE legislation that's passed at the state level. But remember, as we said, the PACE tax is collected at the local level, be it the city, the county, the village, whoever collects the taxes. So the state can pass it, but the local jurisdiction, village, county, whatever, has to adopt it. Now, in New York State passed PACE 5 years ago. New York City, which I sort of see as a major center of finance and capital markets,
Yes,
never adopted it. It wasn't until 2019, April of 2019, when New York City passed something called the Climate Mobilization Act, and we should have another show about that. I'll bring one of my colleagues who talk about it. It's big news. People aren't paying attention to it. The Climate Mobilization Act requires any building owners of buildings 25,000 square feet or more, and that's roughly 40 to 50,000 buildings in New York City, the biggest buildings there are. They have to reduce their carbon emissions to certain levels that are prescribed by 2024 and 2030. Maybe you've heard of it. Okay, it's big news. So if you don't reduce your carbon to these levels, the city is imposing fines on your building, and they're real fines. They're serious fines. It's not slaps in the wrist. The city has said, the city council in the past has said, we don't want your money, we want your carbon. So get your act together, meet these carbon levels. Well, at the same time, the city passes what some might see as an onerous legislation saying reduce your carbon. They said, we're going to help people pay for that. So we're going to finally pass PACE on our own. They didn't adopt the state legislation. New York City passed its own uniquely independent PACE legislation for New York City. That was passed in April of 2019, 2 years ago. We are still waiting for it to go live because with the legislation that the city passed, you need the forms, you need guidelines. They just came out with the guidelines. We're waiting for the forms. The good news is the New York City PACE legislation is about to go live. And with that, you're going to see a lot of New York City landowners who have to comply with the CMA taking PACE loans to pay for it. And that's why PACE is going to become bigger and bigger. And by the way, once PACE loans start being made in New York City, in my view, forgive me, I'm a New Yorker. Once it happens in New York City, it has a big impact on the capital markets.
That is what they say. So can PACE be used is it only for retrofitting? Can it be used for ground up construction?
Great question. Really good question. These are the questions that people are, when we speak to people, developers, owners, that they're asking us. Generally, I'm going to answer your question is in the general scale, it varies by state, right? The PACE is legislatively enabled. So if you want to know if you can do ground up or retrofits, whatever state you're in, you go look at that legislation. When we go do a PACE loan in a particular state, the first thing we do is we get the law, we read it, we see how it works. They're generally similar, but there are nuances. Well, let's talk about New York, okay? New York State, which had PACE legislation 5 years ago, just amended it and it was only for retrofits. It was for retrofits. Just amended it to allow for ground up. It's big news. New York State, though. But remember, we said New York City didn't adopt the state legislation. They have their own. New York City does not yet have ground up. It's only for retrofits. It was designed to help existing owners retrofit their buildings to comply with the Climate Mobilization Act. But now that the state has passed PACE, amended the PACE law to allow ground up, the word on the street is that the city is going to follow suit. The city council will amend the New York City legislation to allow ground up. So we're expecting that will pass. I mean, it makes sense. You want to encourage energy efficiency, at all levels, whether it's retrofits or ground up as well.
That makes sense. So what kinds of things are encompassed in PACE? You mentioned solar panels. What types of other things can PACE be used for besides solar?
Okay. Again, I'm going to say, as a lawyer always says, well, it depends. The PACE, what PACE will finance is determined by the legislation that you're working under. So if you want to know if you're in any given state and you want to know what can I fund with PACE, I'm going to go read the legislation. The legislation, generally similar across the board, finances what we refer to commonly as qualified improvements. And qualified improvements are generally anything that improve energy efficiency or reduce carbon. It's pretty broadly defined. If you're thinking about using it, if you're putting in anything that's going to improve your energy efficiency, it's likely it's going to qualify for PACE financing. The best way to know is to call a PACE lender. This is what they do. They will come in. They'll take a look at what you're wanting to finance, and they'll say whether it qualifies, doesn't qualify. But it's pretty broad. I've even seen people where when in New York City, local law 11, you have to keep the surface, the skins of buildings repaired. And some people get to the point where they have to replace the entire outside of the building. And there's views that if you do that, and there are certain surfaces and skins that can be used that improve energy efficiency, you may be able to qualify for PACE financing for that. And that's a huge expense. So to answer your question, it's pretty broad. Any improvements that are going to lower your energy costs are probably going to comply. New York City excludes light bulbs. Can't finance light bulbs.
Interesting.
Probably the idea is because I guess you could take it out of the, you want things that are affixed and attached to the building. So light bulbs specifically excludes, and you can get energy efficient light bulbs, as you know.
So you said PACE lenders. So not every lender is a PACE lender. Are there lists?
Yes.
So which types of lenders tend to offer PACE?
You just can't be a PACE lender. If you're a lender, the first thing you have to do is, do I want to make the loan? Has the legislation been passed? Has the taxing jurisdiction wherever this property is located adopted PACE? Okay, it's all good. But to be a PACE lender, you have to underwrite the improvements you're financing. You have to actually do an energy audit. There's stuff to know. There's stuff to do. So you have to really qualify yourself as a PACE lender who knows how to underwrite and do the audit for the energy efficiencies and qualify those improvements under the local legislation. Lenders are not just PACE lenders. PACE lenders are PACE lenders. The large institutions have not jumped into PACE yet, although I believe they will, and they'll get up to speed. Because so far, the scale of commercial PACE has been fairly small compared to the rest of the markets, okay? But it's growing dramatically. So I'll give you an example. In 2018, there were roughly 600 to 700 million of PACE loans made in the country, commercial PACE made in the country. That's small in terms of capital markets.
Yeah.
But from 2018 to 2019, it more than doubled 1 year. You look at that, in 2020, but for COVID, it certainly would have doubled again. And now we're getting back to that. So when you see, and now that it's being rolled out in New York City, you can expect exponential growth. When you see that, then you're going to start to see the larger institutions figuring out, hey, I have to make these PACE loans. It's a great economic deal for the borrower and the lender. So the terms on it are very attractive. The trick is getting the mortgage loans to go along, as we spoke about. But so there were probably a dozen major PACE lenders in the last year, but a lot more now coming. A lot more players are coming on board because everyone's expecting a tremendous boom and growth in the number of PACE loans that are going to be made. So there's more and more players coming live. But no, you have to go to a PACE lender who's doing this. New York City, in order to be a PACE lender in New York City, they just came out with the guidelines. You have to qualify. There's an application process. It's pretty detailed. Any financial institution worth its salt will be able to do so, but you have to qualify and apply and be approved by New York City. And those guidelines are literally just out in the last 2 weeks, and I'm sure people are now looking this up, picking up, and figuring out how to qualify.
In the future, do you think that the mortgage lender and the PACE lender will be the same thing, that you'd be able to get your mortgage and your PACE loan within the same financial institution?
Giving away my secrets. These are great questions. They really are. The answer is yes. But I think that there has to be some institutional mortgage lender out there has to make the strategic decision that it's worth their resources and time to get up to speed to make PACE loans. Because the more, in my view, the mortgage lender who can figure out how to do that is going to have a tremendous competitive advantage over other lenders who can't. Think if you can go to a borrower and say, hey, I can offer you. Remember, these are mostly construction loans for the most part. There's some exceptions to that if we can talk about, but it's mostly construction. People take out these loans when they're building a building or retrofitting a building. They get a construction loan from the mortgage lender, and then they get a PACE loan to fund the green stuff. But that's a great competitive advantage they're going to have. So yeah, no one's done it yet, but someone's going to figure it out.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I don't want to get off topic, but I don't know if you're familiar with mezzanine financing.
Yes.
Okay, at all. Okay. Think of PACE financing as the thing that could replace mezzanine financing, right? They're about similar size, and you have someone who's doing a retrofit or new construction, wants to borrow the money, doesn't want to use equity. So they get a construction loan for 70% of the costs, and then they get a mezzanine loan for 10% of the costs. The mezzanine loan is going to be 10, 11, 12% interest. The PACE loan is going to be 5 or 6%, half the cost on the interest. It's going to be long-term. It's much better long-term for the borrower. So now a lot of lenders, construction lenders, they made the construction loan and the mezz loan together. That's how they got the deal. They would able to offer their borrower, full financing. Just as those lenders figured out, I can make the construction loan and the mezzanine loan, they could say, well, I can make the construction loan and the PACE loan. I think they'll have borrowers knocking at the doors.
So how is the interest determined for PACE financing?
Like everything else in the market. Okay. It's fixed rate. It's fixed rate. Okay. And long term. So right now the fixed rates between 5 and 6%. And you're talking for fixed rate, fully amortizing, meaning the loan pays down for the full term, and by the end of the amortization period, which is anywhere from 20 to 30 years, it's paid up. So it's fixed rate, which when you think about it, that's a very good rate for the lender because they're first in priority.
Right.
They're getting 5 or 6% fixed rate long term, and they get paid before any other lenders. It's a pretty good rate. I think you might see those rates come down as the markets, as more and more players come to bear. Sure.
Is there any tax impact involved in PACE? Is there anything? Does it work with some of the tax programs that are out there? Is it deductible in any way? Is the interest deductible?
The interest should be, it's you're paying back. It's a financing. You're paying amortizing payments that have an interest and principal component. So you would write off the interest as you would any other interest expense. Not a tax lawyer or an accountant, but I can't imagine why the result would be any different than that. That's from a tax perspective, yeah.
Just a final question. So how does someone learn more about this? How do they evaluate if it's right for their project?
They can reach out to I don't want to do the commercial, but they can reach out to our
firm.
Go ahead. Contact me at Duval Stachenfeld. We would put you in touch with clients we represent who make PACE loans, the contacts we know who also make PACE loans. And I think the place to really start is with a law firm like us to explain to you how it works, but then really a PACE lender who can evaluate, what green infrastructure, what qualified improvements you have, how much financing you can get, and walk you through the process. So the place to really start is with a lawyer who does the PACE financing and a PACE lender. And we know several. So there's several good players that we work with out there that we can put people in touch with, and we'd be happy to do so.
Awesome. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time today. This was really fascinating. I didn't know anything about this, and now I feel like I have a little bit of an understanding of what it's like. So thank you.
Great. My pleasure. Nice to speak with you today.